Stevie Castanian, Andover.
Bob Saminsky, Superintendent of Schools.
Jane Neal, Business Manager.
Karen Nicoletto, Board Clerk.
Thank you. We could all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Back to the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. At this time, I'd like to ask if anyone has any public comments that they would like to address to the board. If you could, if you will, just stand so the board can hear you and state your name and your town that you live in. Yes.
Mr. Chairman, I'm Andrew Terry, I'm the town manager for the town of Hebron. I'm here on behalf of Chairman of the Board of Selectmen, who couldn't be here tonight, J.D. Larson. He's out of state, but he would ask that you possibly reconsider putting Rich Jacobson on the facilities committee. He felt that the time that he was on there, that he had some expertise, supplied some good information. Thank you.
Anyone else? Move on to item number 4, which is additions and additions to the agenda. What I'd like to do is ask for a motion to move item. Is it under your report, Bob, or is it under mention? The review of 5.4.
5.4.
All right, okay. So if I could ask for a motion to move 5.4 right to after the next section of additions to the agenda, so we can allow Mr. Tierney to give his presentation and the trooper as well, so that we don't have to go any further. So, is there someone who'd like to make a motion?
We 5.4, 5.01.
Thank you, Dave. Is there a second to that?
Second.
Second by Amy. Okay, any discussion? All those in favor, say aye. Any opposed? Abstentions? Okay, motion passes. We have item 5.4 up to right now. So, Mr. Tierney and Dr. Swinsky.
I do have one addition I'd like to make.
Oh, okay, sorry, please go ahead, my apologies.
I'd like to add the subcommittee appointments be added to the agenda to the discussion.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Amy. Any discussion? All those in favor of the change, say aye. Any opposed? Any abstention? Okay, motion passes. Any other proposed changes? So we'll add that item to item 8.10. Right. Is that it, or any other proposal? Mr. Tierney, you have the floor, sir, and Dr. Swinsky.
I think that I sent the board some of the meeting Mr. Chairman and I had last week, and we outlined here the issues confronting the establishment of the position of school resource officer. As you recall, there was money appropriated in the budget. When in August, we were informed by the town manager that we had to put a hold on the process of hiring a school resource officer because of funding from the state. He suggested at that time the issue be revisited in January 2016. Then I received a letter from Mr. Keenan in December 2015, and a copy of the letter is included in your materials. And so therefore, I think that the creation of an SRO replaces a tremendous burden on the town of Hebron. And what I'm asking to continue to do is to kind of elaborate on the issues confronting the town of Hebron and funding the resource officer.
Which I'll gladly do. thank you for having us with me tonight. Is one of the resident troopers, Dan Greenwood, that services both the town of Hebron and Rham as needed at the present. We received, as Dr. Szymanski stated, the request earlier on. This is kind of, or was kind of uncharted waters for us. Town of Hebron is a resident trooper town with 3 part-time police officers. It's the Board of Selectmen's opinion and mine that school resource officer is a good thing. What I always expressed to Dr. Szymanski in several meetings that we had is that at the same time, I can't cannibalize the public safety for the town of Hebron, which I'm responsible for. So knowing we have a resident trooper police force with part-timers, our liability is 90% or 99% covered by the state police, and that's for certain reasons, mostly budgetary. So as we looked into this school resource officer, it was apparent that we would have to hire a full-time police officer, which we presently don't have underneath the town's preview. So in looking into doing that immediately right out of the chute, the state changed their mechanism on how the resident troopers are paid for by the municipalities, and I'm pretty sure Marlboro and Andover kind of saw the same increase that we did. So with that being said, we had requested a meeting with the commissioner of the state police, and I'm glad I gave a January deadline because it took her right up till the end of November to finally meet with us on this issue. And there was no or little movement, especially when it comes to the financing of the troopers. Pretty much what's been laid out is it's heading that they want the smaller towns to pick up 100% funding for these troopers. The appropriations committee are pretty much run by people that have their own police departments from larger towns and other parts of the state, so they don't sympathize with the smaller towns getting state services. They claim they don't use the state police services, and that was one of the arguments that I have, because they use major crime, they use the fire marshal's office, amongst many other services. So it's a fight for another day, but to try to deal with your request, we dove into it, at least on the town side. And some of the issues that came up working through this was, even if we were to hire a Hebron police officer full-time to outfit him to be here, we would have to probably purchase another vehicle. There's conversations where we might be wanting to share a resident trooper, or there possibly could be a deduction of 1 trooper. Either way, if that were to happen, we would have to hire more part-time Hebron police officers, which still doesn't fill the void of your request. But in looking and drilling down even deeper, trying to accommodate your request, and talking with other towns that have SROs, if that person were to be a Hebron police officer in your school and something happened to him, whether he gets sick, whether he get hurt, we don't have any depth. We wouldn't be able to back it up, where my original response back was, if you were entertaining the thought of possibly using a trooper, now with the new scenarios and the financing, that was something they could supply. They cover the liability. There's a certain time frame. If you go so long without a trooper or a person, they automatically fill that position. I think it's 2 weeks, is it, David?
Yes, on average.
So in feeling your pain and wanting to accommodate you, we're just not set up big enough as a town to have a full-time police department. And that's what we would have to do. We would have to hire a full-timer, buy a vehicle, so he'd be supplied. We don't have a backup if that person were to get hurt or get sick or go out for any amount of time. Even if he got into an incident where he would have to be removed until the case was investigated and solved, you'd be without a school resource officer. So I'm not sure if you guys understood all that. I know I didn't, and in looking into it with other towns and with our own state police, that's why we recommended a possible shared police officer, and I'll get into that a little bit more. And I'll let Dan speak to that, because there are other towns that use strictly a trooper as a school resource officer, but that's quite expensive. And when Dan tells you those numbers, I think it's going to be a shocker. So once again, it wasn't like I was trying to have the Hebron's resident trooper or the increased cost from the state of Connecticut picked up by the Rham board. I think anybody of you that have worked with me in the past know I'm very accommodating when I can be. It's frustrating to me when I can't. But at the same time, I think Hebron steps up to the plate, and we take the responsibility. We have the school within our town, and we let our troopers go up there as much as needed. We don't try to recoup any of that or say you got to use a trooper out of the barracks. I think we recognize that. We take the responsibility. But at no time are we trying to get the region or the school board to pick up the extra costs that we're incurring. If sharing a resident trooper is what you wanted to do, or if you want to share it with another town that has a resident trooper, those are just my suggestions of being a part of your budget. It's cheaper than going out and hiring a resident trooper, but it's unfortunate that I sit here today to tell you that we do not have the resources or the money that we would have to add for additional liability. It's just not a feasible option for Hebron at this point in time. I won't elaborate on that at all.
So during our meeting, a few of the issues that we came up with, or some of the options we came up with, shared resource on different levels. The first one I'll speak of is actually you guys reaching out to Troop K and Colchester and actually hiring or having a trooper right out of barracks come right here, have them full-time, fully just for you 100% of the time during the school year. When we look at those numbers, I believe they're addressed in the letter that Dr. Szymanski had drafted for you guys. You're talking salary of the trooper, which ranges from, the first step to upwards to $90,000. You're paying 86 to 86.7% fringe. So you're paying 86% of his salary or her salary, 86% of that for fringe, another 30% for indirect, which is vehicle and other incidentals. So you're up over 100% again. So you're basically doubling the cost, a little over double the cost for a full year. And then you'd have to negotiate something with the commissioner's office for that 9 months, what those numbers would look like. The towns that have done it, money doesn't seem to have been an issue with them at all, so they just went ahead. It is more expensive than a resident trooper for the town of Hebron. You'd actually pay more for someone to come into this town than the town of Hebron pays for one of us. Because they're at a discounted rate, how the system works, you would be at over 100% plus. Another option would be, Mr. Cherney and Dr. Szymanski said that if you're willing to share a resident trooper that's currently in this town or another town that has the ability to do so as such, it wouldn't be on, okay, you're going to be here 4.5 hours today and 2.5 hours tomorrow. It would be you'd have them for the school year and you'd negotiate with the town or whichever time you chose on how to do that, and it would offset. So you'd come up with that dollar value and you'd have them obviously in the town. With that being said, even a trooper that was here full-time, obviously, emergencies that are larger than a school or larger than a community always have the ability to pull out, a state asset. So that really would not change. However, whatever system you would do compared to if you were able to have had a town individual, if it's an incident that's larger and they're not being used at that immediate time, they would probably be reallocated for that incident until they could get back into town. And then obviously there's a few different scenarios within the town that you could if you happen to use Hebron, we currently have a DARE program. Obviously there's a handful of weeks out of the year, not many, roughly 30 days or so out of the year that you're doing it. So you could even talk and negotiate that into where they would go out and they would be partly your SRO for the other Hebron schools only, or even work to the other towns and see if there's something that you want to encompass those community towns in as well. So there is some options out there. Obviously, all that would have to be vetted through my agency, but that's pretty much stops at a barracks level. So as long as the barracks commander was willing to go forward with that, it would move up the chain rather quickly, so it wouldn't take a long time to make those decisions if you guys could make a decision on if that's an option that you would want to look into. Some of the pros of it, obviously, one that Mr. Tierney had stated, sick, ill, an incident that brings them out of the community for an extended period of time, or some sort of incident where they're on leave. The state usually grants a 2-week for the resident trooper program, and you just make sure that was in your language as well. After 2 weeks of not having one, they would be replaced with another trooper until that person then can come back. Obviously, you might not have 100% control of who that person is at that point, but you would have an asset coming in to fill that void in the interim. Working obviously within the town, there's currently 2 of us that are resident troopers in town. So if you did a shared resource, it would have to come from one of the 2 of us, is where you get where if you went out to the troop, you could talk to the troop on how you could vet who that individual might be, what they would help, how you guys could help with the process to figure out who that person would be. Being DARE certified myself, I'm immediately able to go in as a school resource officer with minimal additional immediate training. Obviously, you still want to get the additional training when you can, but it is filled in under that, as well as any other trooper could get that training as quickly as possible, just like a town person would. But the training to get you up and running in the town or in the school wouldn't be any long due process. Obviously, the assets is shared with the state. The liability, obviously, it still sits on the state because we're a state asset. So for liability purposes, if there was an incident where we got hurt, you know, that's between you and the state instead of you and the town, which is much a smaller entity. So those are some of the pros of it. Some of the cons is, you know, depending what you guys want for community base, you know, the trooper might not be as grounded into the community currently. Myself, I've been here almost 5 years. Trooper Fitzgibbons was about here 4.5 years. So we've been in the community for quite a long time. So for Hebron purposes, we have a very good grounded situation. I've been in Troop K for almost eight years now, a little over 8 years, 9 years I think it is now. That's where I started, so I know the area. I'm not coming from another area, and Trooper Fitzgibbons has been here for several years as well. I know Marlboro does have 2 resident troopers. I don't know if that's something that they would be entertained at all, but they do have 2. Andover only has 1, so I don't know if that's something where Andover would be willing to take obviously off and not having the ability. And for the Hebron situation, I believe the town would be looking into offsetting some of the lack of patrol because the resident trooper came into the school with part-timers out on the road, so you wouldn't be 100% down all that time. I don't know if they'd be able to fill 100%, but they would bring up that number, so you're still getting coverage in town for the people that are paying for the service in town.
No, I think that you summarized the issues and the options well. I think that going forward, it becomes, remember, I'm just putting it up for a full-time resource officer, and it becomes a philosophical discussion of what we'd like to do.
So my question is why do we have to even get involved with the town of Hebron when hiring an SRO? Can't the board hire an SRO? I don't understand how the town of Hebron comes into play.
If I'm correct, the person that you hire has to be, in order to have a certified SRO, has to be affiliated with the police department, and because the school's located within the Hebron.
But I believe there was a provision put in the act, I think what you're asking, Dave, is that you could do a school resource officer through the town, or like we're discussing, but I think they allowed, wouldn't be a resource officer, I think it would be a safety officer for the school. If it was a retired police officer in Connecticut, I believe there has to be some certification there. But it was one of the early discussions we had, they wouldn't have access to the radio, they wouldn't have direct connection to the local police, but they would be able to be here, be trained, and be able to respond in an emergency and provide some safety type of efforts, like a school resource officer, but they wouldn't be an actual school resource officer.
Yeah, I mean, wouldn't they be an employee of the?
It would change the person to be an employee of the district,
Yeah.
is what they would ultimately do, and they would be subject to the direction of the superintendent or the principals or the person's house.
So was the decision made that we weren't going to go that route?
There was no decision made. What we did was we looked at the option of the school SRO and Hebron having the actual police department of trying to, I think the original proposal was to have an officer exclusively through Hebron assigned to the school. So it would be a school resource officer through the town of Hebron. It was kind of the most costly, at least at the time when we started talking about it, but as we find out more and more, I guess this cost just keeps going on. So,
There was also the fact, Dave, that the proposal had a cruiser. So, you know, we had presentations from Colchester, I believe, come in, and the benefits of having a police cruiser or vehicle here, radio, weapons, lock-up storage. You had to arrest somebody, you had somebody you could put in a physical car. So there was a lot of that discussion kind of beated around, and I think the conclusion was that, if memory serves me right, was that it was the best bang for a dollar to go with the police officer, because we already had the police officer here during the morning down at the crossing as well. So all that taken into account, it was probably the easiest way to go. You know? And then we didn't have to district didn't have to bear the cost of benefits and all that other stuff as well.
Any other questions?
How many days a week would a police officer be under this scenario?
That would have to be determined. What we figured, and talking to Dr. Saminsky, is he has it down to the days. We roughly figured 9 months, so it'd be, ratio that way. The town would take that other officer the other month that he's not here, and there would have to be some sort of ratio that would be acceptable to the school board.
So that be, I'm sorry.
I wasn't here when those original presentations, well, I guess you were, and Sue wasn't here, so I think sounds like there are a lot of factors to take into consideration, maybe we should, like, have a study or something.
We may have to revisit it, because it's kind of
Yeah.
different than what we originally
Yeah.
proposed, I guess. I mean, it would probably require a different agreement if we decided to go in a different direction.
Once again, this is an area that was uncharted for me, and we reached out to some of the towns that do it. A lot of the towns use, they have their own police departments, and they use police officers. And must be reasons for that, but we didn't drill down that far to see if it were a shared situation, what the ratio would be.
Well, I know in Andover, it's basically like a 40-hour week. You know, it's a Monday through Friday kind of thing, and so, I mean, if we had, school goes from what, 7 to 3? I mean, that's kind of an 8-hour day, so, I mean, if we did that, we'd have the officer for 9 months out of the 12 months. And why would we why would he even be interested in 3 months of an officer, especially when they probably got a month worth of,
It wouldn't just be proportion to that. You would probably have them wherever you felt was needed during that day for certain days, or all day, or certain days, and other days you don't have, it would have to be worked out. The matrix wasn't even visited.
From you cited some towns having different agreements. Is there a town that was in a similar place to Rham that went in the direction of shared services that we could look to?
I know the town of Summers, I believe it is, just went with, I don't know if they went through the resident trooper program or went right to the barracks. However, they have over 2 resident troopers in town anyways, so that the current workup as a town. The state will give 2 resident troopers at that discounted rate of 80 point something or other %, and after that, 3 or more is 100% anyways. So I know Towland and Summers are 2 that did go. They do have current resource officers that are troopers in the town. I know a lot of the Hartford school system, some of the magnet schools are like the Cheney Tech, and some of the other technical schools have brought troopers back into it. Obviously, they're a little different because they're sharing a handful of troopers to more than that amount of schools, but that is another system that is in there.
The budget process is different than ours.
Yes, a much different budget process, much easier to handle. For a regional
The
purpose,
demographic profile of Summers and Towland are
Relatively,
pretty similar
yes,
to
relatively
this.
close.
Sure, yeah.
Yep. So for an admin trooper, you work a standard, and it can always be modified if it's needed. It's a Monday through Thursday, and then a Monday through Friday the following week. So it's a 4-3-5-2, and it doesn't have to necessarily be Friday. Some people, it's just based on the standard 5-3. So how in a 6-week period, you work a certain amount of days is how it all comes out. So your 5 days on, 3 days off is your standard patrol trooper, and that's how it rotates. So in order to make that adjust into an administrative schedule on a Monday through Friday scenario, that's why you have that Monday through Friday, the weekend off, and Monday through Thursday. Now that obviously can all be worked in. I don't know how those individual towns have currently done it, if they just assume that and then move that day around, or if they try to push those days out to part of that, those handful of months on the off side. I'm not 100% sure how they do it. And then outside of obviously your standard training days that any police officer would have to go and take care of, those numbers aren't going to be any different whether they were post-certified or if they were, which would be what the town of Hebron currently is, or any other police officer, or if they came through our agency. The biggest difference between sharing it with the resident trooper in the current situation compared to hiring your own is purely just the amount of money that you'd have to spend for it and the agreement you would make with either one of the other towns or Hebron. You would be on it for 113% of the plus salary. If you were to get just a trooper by yourself compared to sharing it with the town. So I think that's really your only difference. The town, as far as I was concerned, and I don't think we were in agreement, we weren't looking to say, okay, he's gonna be in your school for Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then back out in town for those 2 days. It was gonna be more, they're gonna allow you to allocate that person to the town for the school year, and then outside of the school year, they'd go back into the town for those handful of months. Kind of how, if you remember when the town, if any of you guys were on the board, the state used to actually, I don't know if they were loaning or they were allowed troopers into, it was a grant that they did for several years. You guys had a trooper here. When the school year was over, they just went back and were on patrol, and then would come back into the school. That's how the scenario would more than likely look in any of those scenarios if it was involving a trooper. To just talk one on, if I'm not sure the current statute, I know it has been changing with everything in the safety program. If they're not a post-certified police officer, and a post-certified police officer would actually have to be under the direction of some town, they wouldn't have police powers, so they couldn't arrest people. You'd still be having to call in a police officer to handle those situations. Obviously, you'd still have security, and you'd still have that level, but you wouldn't have the ability for them to do a lot of investigations. You would still have to call an outside source for any investigation that involves police in that scenario.
To Andy, so if I understand this correctly, so the state is $200,000 for the trooper, right?
Through the barracks.
To the barracks. So what is your proposal now? You would bring in another police officer, would that be still a proposal, but we would have to flip the bill for that police officer?
No, we would share one of the guys we have now, 'cause we're looking to reduce our costs due to the increase from the state.
So we would
So we would share one of our resident troopers, and I would pick up another even part-time police officer to cover the shifts during the day.
What is that total cost again, that would share?
What's, use the highest step?
Currently, it's like 89. At the end of our contract in 2.5 years, it would be a top step trooper, 94,000 and change.
So round it up to 100, you go through the troops 200, and you back it out to 9 months. But for a year, it'd be 200,000 through the troop, 100,000 through roughly, maybe a little bit more.
What's the reimbursement rate from the state? I was on the Board of Finance in Andover for many years, and I know one of the things that we had to worry about is every year the state kind of cut the reimbursement for towns for our residents. And I'm assuming this year they cut that again?
That's what he's talking about. Having our two troopers, our budget, police budget increased $55,000 after we accepted our budget.
For two troopers?
For the two, the increase was, I know Marlboro's, I think, was like 20 odd.
Because they had one.
No, they have two, but for some reason there
Why
was,
would it?
Based on salaries and when their salaries fall
Steps.
Oh, okay,
and all that, unfortunately.
yeah.
And you're at that win until they're at the top step.
So they're not, it hasn't gotten to a zero reimbursement from the state yet?
not yet, but what I
I know we're
said,
talking about it, so if we went down this road, we could be in this, our next budget year, we could have a significant increase because the state decided not to reimburse anything.
I explained that to Bob when we were meeting. What it did is it went from an 85% fringe. Fringe is their retirement, the car, things of that nature, up to 100%. So that's the increase that we're facing. And we pay 100% of the overtime.
Ah,
But with the new contract language, we have no control over the overtime. So it kind of, to me as a town manager, was an oxymoron. We're gonna pay for it, but have no control over it. But
And Andy, the Hebron police officer option, liability was the big concern for the town.
liability and supplying you, we would have to hire more than one full-timer, because if that guy was out, our part-timers were already
I see.
filling the shifts that the police, the town of Hebron. It wasn't for lack of wanting to try to help out, it's just, right now, everything falls underneath the state police, and we do that for budgetary reasons, and that is an insurance liability reason is the big driver. But other than that, we could say we give you a resource officer, I go out and buy a car, and we put it up here with the guy. If the guy gets hurt or gets into an incident, and he's out, I don't have anybody to back him up. So you're paying for something you're not gonna get, so I just, like I said, most of these conversations are with, Mr. Saminsky throughout the year.
Yep.
And it was a learning experience, I think, for both of us, and it still is. But I just, we got the request, we took it seriously, and the setback was when the state changed how they charged the towns, was an immediate red flag. I gotta make sure we take care of at least the town before we can try to help take care of it, SRO at this
So
point.
we only have one trooper during the day, right?
We divide them up, it depends on what they're doing, but mostly you're right, Joe, one at night, one in the day.
So we take this trooper out and put him in the school. There's no trooper out in the public presence, other than if there was an emergency, which I get you said he would have to leave here to go to attend to that emergency situation.
Well, not only that, we're a resident trooper town, the barracks is the next town over, but we were looking to hire at a lot cheaper rate, a couple more part-timers to fill those shifts during the day. 20 hours or below, that's what a lot of these retired police officers from the state like to work. So we wouldn't have to pay a benefits package. It still would be a state trooper town, we wouldn't have a liability issue.
So, I guess another question I have is, how does the state police support that? If we're gonna have a state trooper here, and we're not gonna have any presence in the community during the daytime?
Well, like I said, we're a trooper town, the barracks is right down the street, so we're always covered by the barracks.
But
And
that's
we would bring it
Colchester,
on.
though.
Yep. One of the scenarios, if this doesn't work out here, the talking is probably just cutting the trooper and bringing even down to one trooper to still be in the trooper program and fill those shifts with, part-timers.
Andover has one, so Monday through Friday, then, or, 9 to 5, and then after that, we use the rolling troopers.
Yeah, but Andover's.
Much smaller.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
and the same in Marlboro has two, right?
Yes, they do. One during the day and one evening. And I don't know if it would end up being not one during the day or not one at evening, but yes, you would have that hole during the time that they're in the school, and it'd be offset by part-time officers within the town of Hebron, is where the offset would come from.
So your boss would support having a police officer here during the day with no presence in Hebron, other than coming from Troop K in Colchester?
Again, I'd have to verify that 100%, but their contract is with the town of Hebron, and then if the town of Hebron and you guys had a reasonable contract, which would be that MOU to share that resource, if it's something that they thought was practical, they would support that. And again, he might say, well, I want that other resident trooper still on during the day, and we offset, all the part-time coverage at night, which is very common for a lot of resident trooper towns, so you have that admin person during the day. So you still have the, what people are expecting, and the offset would all be at evening. I haven't heard any major, absolutely don't go this way, we're not gonna support it. But obviously, until they see it on paper and see exactly what's laid out in front of them to go through. It is an option that has been used out there within other communities. It's just now that the resident trooper, or the SROs are coming back into schools, it's starting to get one at a time, trying to figure out how they're gonna do it. And it's very costly to do it just by your own 100%.
And we met with the master sergeants and the lieutenants, knowing that this letter was gonna go out and this proposal was gonna be sent.
So you have your proposal, this proposal is that you, at the town of Hebron's gonna pick up some of the costs?
Well, we presently have 2 troopers now. We're looking to offset some of the increase that the state gave us. So this would be one way, but at the same time, it's not just benefiting Hebron. If you were to use a resident trooper, the discounted rate is way cheaper than going independently. The request that came to me from Dr. Saminsky, and I think it was through the board, is they were looking for a Hebron police officer to fill that SRO position. We sincerely looked at that, but the resources that we have and the liability issues, we don't have a full-time police force, and we would have to create one, and it wasn't feasible.
What constitutes an emergency that would pull an officer out of the school?
In a situation where, they're in the school and they're presently doing something, you're probably talking, it would probably say a bank robbery, but it wouldn't necessarily be one here because obviously they're gonna want someone at the school because of the relatively proximity, maybe in Marlboro. You wouldn't see anyone outside of, some of the major incidents that have happened in the state that we're all aware of where everybody's going regardless of who you are. You're not seeing them, they're not going out for an alarm down the street, they're not gonna go out for, you know, a domestic, because there's other policing in the area. So you're talking, you know, large newsworthy incidents that would be drawing them out. And it would only be to stabilize the incident, and then they would be going back to their current position.
Yeah, I think, we should probably take some time to look at this, might need a subcommittee to study it, because I'd like to know the past implications of having, the actual past implications of having an officer, how much coverage we'd be getting versus if we were to hire a retired police officer. I'd like to know all the options and kind of have it studied and then maybe a report from the committee.
We have item 8.8 on the agenda for us to kind of digest all this and kick around back with next steps, and we can talk about that. And I think if this scenario is feasible, I think the board would probably ask Dr. Sumsky to come up with what this looks like, however it works, or what the terms are, to see what's feasible, what it costs, and then we'll just have to look at it again. Because we got all the way down to almost like a proposed agreement to do the town, but it makes sense what you're saying, so we'll just come together and give Bob our guidance, I guess, of how we need to do it.
Village subcommittee, it's that safety.
Yeah, exactly.
It's all over there.
One thing I would just say, if you are looking for an outside police officer that's not affiliated, just understand that would not supplement any policing that needs to be done here, or anything out, your current 2 police officers that are here every day for parking. You could use it for that, but it would not be anything out in the street. It would be 100% enclosed to your campus with no police power. So basically, they would be a security guard that would be no different than a bank hiring a security guard or something like that. So just understand those parameters. Even though they're a retired police officer, they do have no police powers outside of not being affiliated with a police department. So there's a huge difference.
But they could call the police if someone needed to be arrested on campus.
Correct.
They could detain them.
That would be something that you'd have to deal with your legal department on how they can or cannot. I would caution that without knowing the legal parameters of that, but possibly.
Yeah.
I know like Walmart, they can use reasonable efforts to detain shoplifters.
Right.
Probably the same premise you would go, but then again, do you want to assume that liability? That's something that you guys decide not. It would be your liability, not some police department's liability at that point. So just caution yourself with that. And the phone call would be a 911 call, no different than you're doing now. It wouldn't be any radio. It would have no access to us outside of a standard telephone line. So those are just things you have to look into.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. And Andy, I'm sorry, last time we kind of went to the end of the agenda, so I'm glad we were able to.
That's okay.
But thank you very much for this, and I'm sure we'll give you our guidance.
We'll do what we can. I apologize.
And I appreciate
The
it.
depth.
I just have a question. Would there be the possibility, I heard what you said about the same access as a phone line with the state police, with the Hebron police, would there be a possibility that it'd be better communication or different communication in case there was an emergency, or?
If we were to put a Hebron police officer in here?
No, I guess well, maybe I'm confused about the structure. Hebron has resident state troopers who are
Correct.
state policemen, and then Hebron also has part-time police force.
Would still use the same frequency and direct barracks dispatch, even though they're Hebron police officers, that we're connected with the state police. That's one of the benefits of having the resident trooper program. All our radios are still run through their state.
I see. So then I was just wondering if so they would just have the same, you're saying phone communication that anybody has there?
Correct.
Okay.
We don't staff the office 24, or even while they're on duty, they're patrolling, so there could be someone in the office, but that person's then gonna have to still radio over, so the fastest way would be either right to the troop, or 911 would get your quickest
Sure,
response, obviously.
okay.
So that's how that would
So
work.
the town of Hebron has constables?
Yes, constables, part-time police officers, yes.
But they don't work for Troop K, they work for town of Hebron?
Correct, and same with like Marlboro has a full-time and a part-time, same scenario.
Okay.
Yeah,
The constables go through the state dispatch.
Yep, yes, they do. Yep, so they have the same radio system, all that is the same.
I don't like to use the word constables, but I guess it's appropriate, but they're also trained police officers. They just can't go into depth on an
But they're not
investigation.
state police employees.
Right.
Correct, yes, they're assets of the individual town's post-certified police officers.
Thank you very much.
Well,
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Going back to the agenda, go ahead and start with the report of the administration, Bob, 5.1.
5.1. I just wanted to review again the factors that would be impacting the fiscal 16-17 budget, because I think that given the action of the state to cut the state budget, and it's going to have an impact on us, so we're watching that closely and taking a look at some of the things that will impact the budget. I think the first impact is going to be health insurance. We've received a preliminary estimate of an increase of 14.1%. I will say this, though, that by having each employee join the health savings account rather than the PPO plan that was there, will save approximately $2,000 per family member. And I think that this is, so that we're talking about a 14% increase, I think that it's going to be 14% of a lower number. That number, by the way, is a preliminary number, and we expect that to go down. The insurance consortium is going to go up to, has voted to go out to bid. And in the interim, and this is a topic that will be discussed at the next meeting, Anthem has said, well, if you don't go out to bid, we will lower the quote substantially. So that'll be a discussion for the group on Monday. One wonders if they're willing to do that, what would it do? But I think that that's a discussion for Monday, for Thursday, I'm sorry. So health insurance is a significant item in the budget. I think that the board has acted prudently going to health savings account, but now it becomes what happens with the rates that Anthem is going to provide. So we'll keep you appraised and we'll send you the minutes of the insurance consortium. I think another thing that we need to look at is the salary increases that have been negotiated both in the teachers' contract and the non-certified union. The only union that is up for negotiations in the coming year is the Principals Association, so that we'll begin negotiations probably in November and December, just because being a region, we're at the end of the order for negotiations. Next is transportation. And as I've indicated previously, the transportation grant has been reduced from $104,000 in the fiscal year 15 to $88,000. In a conversation with Mrs. Morgan this evening, she's indicated that there are going to be further reductions in transportation. She's talking, the state has cut $1 million from transportation aid. I don't know what that means for us specifically. She will be getting back to me with the specific cuts. And she also reminded me that the governor has the ability to cut an additional 1% from his budget, from the state budget. So we're not sure of where that impact is going to be, and so we'll be watching that closely. Technology, we're looking at, this is the last year for major funding of E-rate for networks. So we're looking at that. In fact, we've gone out to bid, and the bids need to be out at least through the end of the month, and we'll have some idea of what that means. What we're looking to do is to upgrade as much of the network as possible, because parts of it will be 3 years old, and if we can get E-rate on most of it, it would be, I think, prudent to do so. But we'll be able to make some recommendations, as soon as when the bids come in, and we can see what funding is available to us. Excuse me. Another thing we're gonna be looking at is we're gonna be looking at the one-to-one strategy adopted last year. Our hope is to put Chromebooks into grades 9 and 10 for the upcoming year. We're looking also at smart boards and projectors. Some of the smart boards are 10 or 11 years old, some of the projectors are just as old. So we're looking at them to determine what should be done as far as replacement. Remembering that some of the software is not compatible with the smart boards that are that were installed at the time the building was built. Another thing we're looking at staffing. We're looking at making reductions as far as levels of staffing in both the high school and middle school. One of the things that we're looking at the high school is to combine all level 3 classes as far as possible. So we're looking at scheduling and what economies we can gain through scheduling for staff. Another thing that we're looking at is the position of athletic director. And I think that with the retirement of Mr. Logan, if you would recall, that's a .4 position. And to fill a .4 position would be very difficult. He's .4 social studies teacher, .4, .6 athletic director. So that one of the things we're looking at and trying to analyze and come up with some costs on is the possibility of consolidating the position of athletic director for both schools, and to see what the cost would be and what the other implications would be for such a move. Revenues received by the district, excess cost, pay to play, gate receipts are all being analyzed. Excess cost, we're not sure what the state is going to do because of the budgetary difficulties. And as I had written previously, the educational cost sharing grant is going to be reduced. If my memory is correct, Hebron will be about $30,000, Marlboro will be about $13,000, and Andover will be $190. So we're looking at that to see what impact that has. So ECS, excess costs, those are some of the big grants that we get from the state, and potentially will have an impact on us. We're looking at some good news in the cost of oil. With the glutton oil, we'll probably save somewhere around $105,000, $108,000 just in the cost of oil, just because it's so much lower than it was this current year. And then finally, there'll be we're looking at the savings that we accrued last year when we refinanced the bonds. We're looking at a savings of somewhere around $110,000, $111,000 because of refunding the bonds last year.
Statement or is that an increase? From this year, that's an increase, right?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Our bonds cost is going up $100,000.
No, we refinanced, it's going to go down.
Finance at a lower rate. Right. So it's down.
Well, we took it as a lump sum.
No, we took
The
it
savings.
in two.
2 years, over 2 years.
Over 2 years.
It was over 2 years. The first year was approximately $126,000. This year's approximately $111,000. This is the sheet for the first site last year.
But we took
We took 1 year of it.
I thought Kevin made a motion to take it all as a reduction in last year's budget.
No, it was over 2 years, but I didn't think it was the same amount. I thought it was like 200, 100.
It's
It's not the
126
same.
and 11.
It was 2 different amounts over the two, but it's coming in the first 2 years is when we see the significant reduction. I think there's even some on the amortization schedule, there was smaller savings in year after, right? Not much, but
Might be some, but
yeah.
it's going to be relatively minor.
But this from last year's budget, this is the actual increase.
I don't know, I have to see.
The cost of the bonds, maybe I should say it this way, just so the understanding is clear. The cost of the bonds in the upcoming budget will be reduced by about $111,000. The bond payments
In 16, 17.
in 16, 17.
So So last year's was, there was no discount from last year?
There was $126,000 last year.
So you're seeing we're gonna get a total of 200 for this year?
No, I'm not saying 200.
100 more?
Yes.
I'm saying the total over 2 years was approximately $236,000. What happens is that when you pay the cost of the amount of money we have to pay the bonds, they pay to the banks, I'm sorry, is reduced in the first year by $126,000. Next year, the amount that we have to appropriate for bond payments is reduced by $111,000. We can only take that $126,000 discount once.
That tells me that we're the same as we were last year.
Any other questions?
You mentioned possibly doing some consolidation of level 3 classes. Could you just elaborate on what you meant by that?
As we look at level 3 classes, I think we need to be careful that we adhere to the state regulation of time with non-disabled peers. And we're examining each of the special ed classes to be sure that we address that issue. And if they are particularly special education classes, then we will call them special education classes, not level 3 classes. And so we're looking to consolidate some of those with level 2 classes, and we're in the process of realizing that as I speak.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
You didn't mention any maintenance things in there?
Oh, I'm sorry, that was the last item, I was going to skip over as we started talking about math. One of the things that I will be talking to the facility subcommittee about is how to address the Senator Roaston, how to address the bond request of Senator Roaston versus the needs we know that are out there. And I think that that's a discussion that we need to have because I'm not sure as to the best way to proceed on that. But what we've done is we've identified essentially three capital budgets. One, taking the recommendations from the Collier report, the long-term and the short-term recommendations. We've taken the recommendations that we feel are necessary for security, and we've taken a look at some maintenance projects that are probably in the $5,000 range, and kind of stretch those out over 3 years. So I think there's a discussion we need to have with the facility subcommittee. Additionally, I think that there's another discussion that needs to be held, and I would recommend that we have an executive session to discuss it pending litigation.
5.2, education specifications for handicap accessibility project.
Well, as a result of the district meeting today with the consolidation of the non-recurring capital funds, I can submit to the state the request for construction. Where we have to be with the request is I have to have all the pieces in play. As you would recall, when the project first came up, the board approved the building committee and the creation of the necessary things. But before I could submit the application to the state, I needed to have a funding source for the district portion. Now that I've got that, I can submit that back to the state. And just some preliminary discussions with the folks from the state, we should be able to be constructing during the summer.
We're talking about that later on. It's under item 8.6. 5.3, discussion of the proposed 2016-17 budget calendar.
I've included in the packet a proposal for the calendar, and we're just looking at scheduling and just wondering how the board feels about that, because I know it requires a time commitment of a good deal of time commitment, and I want to just be sure that in scheduling meetings that I don't conflict with schedules that are out there, and we can have fruitful budget discussions on those evenings.
Two comments or that I'll make about that. One is, I know we get a lot of comments, positive comments from the towns for having the meetings in various towns. One of the complaints we get is that it takes us a long time to get our budget done. And my only comment or observation would be is, do we need to have the meetings over the 4-week period? Is there a way we need to have 4 meetings, or is there a way we can consolidate over a short period of time?
I think that we're in the process, we're almost finished with the first draft of the budget, we expect that shortly. What we would like to do is, once we get that, to present it to the board, and then have the board, whatever the schedule is, I think it helps us to have a rather rapid schedule of the budget, and to have a number to the towns, as early as possible.
Just a thought.
Yeah, I would just, focus what you just said. I went through the process last year for the first time, and it was probably the most detailed, intensive process I've ever been through. I thought some aspects of it were good, but some aspects of it were probably not necessary. And I think it'd be interesting to see what budget the administration comes up with, and then decide how many of those other meetings we really need. There may be certain areas we may have questions, and we want to have some more in-depth information about, but then there are some things that we just have to rely, because ultimately we ended up relying on, the administration to come back and kind of call things out anyway, so.
We have item 8.7 in discussion to adopt the budget calendar, so
Okay.
unless anybody has any questions about, there were just some comments I just wanted to just feedback that we've had in the past. 5.4, we've already taken care of. 5.5, even all boards meeting, we close at 5.5.
Just a reminder of the Hebron All Boards meeting that's scheduled for the 19th. I just included an agenda. I will be there, and I just want to remind everybody of the fact of the meeting and some of the topics that will be there on the agenda.
The 19th?
The 19th, Douglas Library, 6:30 p.m.
Oh, it's the 19th, it's not
The
tomorrow.
19th.
For some reason, I thought it was tomorrow. Okay.
19th.
Better check my calendar. Okay. Any questions? Yes,
I
Council.
have a question for Dr. Szymanski. Do you have any update on the tennis safety net?
We're meeting with the technical specifications are complete. We're meeting with the architect, hopefully tomorrow, to finalize the front end specifications, the technical specifications. The first draft we received from them indicated that the bids could be faxed in. Obviously, when we're dealing with municipal bids, that can't happen. And there were some other errors in the first part of specifications. So we'll be reviewing those with you tomorrow.
What were the errors in the specification?
The faxed in bids, they didn't have correct numbers, contact information. They had had a walkthrough on a holiday, and if we do something like that, we'll be faulted. Those are some of the specifications. They also didn't indicate whether the job was going to be a prevailing wage job or not, because we're not sure where that stands. That's the type of thing we need to iron out.
Okay, also, will the facilities committee get to see the design?
Yes.
The new design,
Yes.
to review that? Good, okay, thank you.
I think I have it electronic, and I can send it out to everybody.
Okay, good.
5.6, monthly financial report, or monthly report.
As noted in the budget memo, we currently have a balance of $1.8 million. I submitted transfers for approval for tonight, which show a amount of $71,836. The reports are basically